I saw the Backrooms movie twice, once with a friend and once with my wife the next day. These are my quick thoughts on the movie from the information I presently remember. If you guys want a more in-depth review of the movie based on the thoughts you hear from this video, please let me know, as I'd love to type out a much longer and more formal review. I can't provide visuals because the movie hasn't left theaters yet, I can't record it in theaters, and just editing all the videos from the Backrooms playlist is quite an arduous task. I'll have chapter markers in the description, but please just bear with this still image for this one. There tends to be two social understandings of what the Backrooms are outside of the whole liminal space thing. One of them is the SCP-style understanding, where the Backrooms are a sort of supermassive entity that contains various levels of different types the farther down you go. This has been more or less memed into obscurity, but that understanding is still very much present in the modern day. It's actually an explanation for why some places give off the Backrooms feel without actually possessing the standard yellow wallpaper. The second understanding is the one pretty much pioneered by Kane Pixels himself, in that the Backrooms is something you can take from the original meme and more so manipulate to whatever suits your medium of storytelling. In Mr. Parsons' case, as far as the YouTube videos were concerned, the Backrooms is a parallel universe to ours that can be accessed by accident in rather Narnia-like fashions. The main difference, of course, is that a group of scientists by the name of Async have figured out how to keep their door open. They refer to the Backrooms as the Complex, with their plans being to inevitably market it to people as a place for mass storage space and some sort of living situation for many people. This is proven to not be very viable throughout the videos, as the complex is home to entities currently not fully understood, as well as the rooms themselves possessing the ability to skip people through space and time. The basic summary of the video's main plot is that in 1989, the Async research facility based in San Jose basically opened a door of their own into the complex through their low-proximity magnetic distortion system. It's unclear if they created it or simply opened a door into it, but regardless, their experiments and massive power usage finally succeeded. The point of this system, as outlined by Vice Director Ivan Beck, is to solve storage and residential needs, and that this could very easily work if provided enough backing from the US government. Through various high-stress tests and an eventual meltdown of the system, an exterior was mapped out through the doorway that was essentially torn open through sheer brute force. Miraculously, the doorway stayed open. At the start of 1990, the science team pours all of their research efforts into understanding the world that they have either created or entered. At the same time, missing person signs are posted around the area. This is shown to have a massive spike at the exact time that Async opened the complex, October of '89. An exploration team winds up actually finding one of these missing persons, scorched beyond belief, inside the complex itself. An autopsy is done on the body, and Ivan Beck himself is there to supervise it, though it isn't revealed why. What's weird about the autopsy is that parts of the body stopped decaying while others decayed faster, with a common fungus found in decaying digestive tracts of people. The informational video is essentially where the first major property of the Backrooms comes into play. One of the members of another exploration group gets separated for a very short time, and as he sees his group walking by, they disappear. The scenery is the same, but his co-workers are gone. He eventually finds his way into a room that looks out of place and triggers an alarm. Turns out he was teleported essentially into the future, from February 29th to May 8th. As far as the camera indicates, this is still the same day, as he records the important parts of his walk thereafter on the same battery life, presumably. This is followed up on the same day in-universe with an unlisted video of a phone recording between a scientist and Ivan Beck himself, though only the scientist is audible. He describes how an employee tripped the motion detectors and how it's caused a fair bit of trouble. He tries to figure out why, and he doesn't even know who it is, which means that whoever this employee was that got time-traveled has been more or less forgotten by upper management. The employee himself doesn't know who the scientist is, and he seems to have a hard time communicating with anyone on the team. Peter Tench is revealed to be his name, to which Ivan seems to respond extremely negatively. After a bit of back and forth, the scientist asks, "This isn't him, is it?" This indicates that everyone is aware of what happened, and they kept it quiet. They essentially wrote him off as legally dead after they couldn't find him, and now that he's back, this would cause massive damage to the reputation of the project of the complex itself. There is a time continuum problem that is currently not understood by async, and this needs to be nipped in the bud. On May 25th, another exploration team is sent into the complex, this time with weaponry for defense against whatever has been causing the employees so much distress. A scuffle is started, with Peter eventually being revealed to know the members of the exploration team. He seizes control of the shotgun and mortally wounds an explorer named Mark, after which he flees. The next day, Async holds a damage control meeting. The situation has gotten significantly out of hand. A man they previously considered dead and didn't want to deal with bringing back to life logistically has now killed another one of their researchers. Not only that, but he then follows the trail from the explorers into the research facility itself, and through holding various people at gunpoint to ensure his safety, he escapes the whole facility. Peter is back in the real world after being presumed dead for almost 3 months. There's a mistake made in reference to the exact date, as the description of the video that this all started with is dated the 29th of February, but the tape in the damage control video says the 27th, and the character narrating over it says the 1st of March. But honestly, that's a negligible mistake. It is also revealed that the entire tape from Tench's perspective on that day was about 30 or so minutes overall, confirming that in just the span of less than a day, Tench wound back up in the complex at a date more than 2 months after the moment he was whisked away from his team. What followed Peter's discovery was the research team essentially trying to find a way to reintegrate a legally deceased man back into society after they made a convincing cover story of his death. He was willing to cooperate at the time, but the team was taking too long, and Peter's containment in a facility room essentially became solitary confinement. Combined with the horrifying experience in the complex just a week or two prior, he believed that he was indeed in a hallucination constructed by the complex and could not trust his old co-workers. As they were about to transfer him into an actual place in the real world for a time, Peter broke out, stole credentials, and ran back into the complex. 3 days later, he would encounter the team that he then wrangled a shotgun from. He then ran through the research facility, for which the container for the complex itself is now confirmed to be underground. And while he loses the shotgun in the process, he makes it to the elevators and escapes the entire facility. He gets outside, and as he's running, he stumbles, strikes his head on a rock, and dies on the spot. So there goes the need to reintegrate him, I guess. In spite of that, cryptic scenery at the end of the video would imply a possible opposite story, that Tench is alive and actively on the run, in spite of what we're told by the researcher in the recording. Conveniently, evidence of every event in the story is provided except Tench's recovered body, which I would assume Async would want to take back to keep it all quiet just for sure. So, Tench, for all intents and purposes, might still be alive. A story was probably fabricated for the scientists in the facility to keep them calm enough, but the higher-ups would know the truth, and that is a setup for amazing future conflicts if written about properly. The final video uploaded at the time of the movie's release regarding the Async plotline reveals that 2 co-workers of Peter's, Marv and George, believe that indeed Peter is dead. Marv believes that Async killed him and that this is all a cover-up leading right to the government. George is convinced that this is nothing to worry about, as many others have had the same conversation with him, and the willingness to not have a repeat of what happened is too important to everyone now. Marv is consoled, and the rest of the footage is establishing the complex's further properties, namely that there are places where the wallpaper texture appears to stretch, as if the walls are growing in non-compliance with the pattern, as well as a room where furniture is embedded in the various walls and floor. This is the Backrooms storyline, according to the YouTube videos. The Backrooms, or complex, essentially are something either found or created by Async that has a nasty habit of time-warping things inside of it, seemingly at random, while also having no clear construction coherency, with artifacts from the real world spread about, as if they've either been placed there, forced there, or attempted to be emulated by the rooms themselves. The found footage series of videos has essentially established that doorways keep opening into the complex after the initial door at Async is open, suggesting that human access to the complex is now causing the complex to open more access points of its own. What's more is that the doorways themselves move, change size, and sometimes disappear altogether. As a result, there is much that is unknown about the Backrooms themselves, especially regarding the organisms that seem to be chasing people in the found footage series in particular. With that in mind, there are high hopes that the movie itself would expand upon the story, mechanics, world building, and overall understanding of the Backrooms as they stood in the YouTube videos. The trailers, however, indicated a very strong tone shift in that the plot would focus more on the kinds of people that would find themselves in the position of the found footage characters rather than async. That's perfectly fine, as the original found footage exploded in popularity for a very good reason. It's an excellent introduction point for people new to the concept of a labyrinth that you essentially no-clip to in real life by accident. It puts the viewer in the shoes of the character himself, alone, scared, with nothing more than the camera to document the observations in this seemingly new reality. So, if the movie wants to retread that ground in movie style, it's more than welcome to do that. My only hope going into the movie the first time around was that it would feature enough async to keep me invested, as a great deal of the intrigue and the horror on a personal level was from the nature of the science and how, in their best efforts to understand what they tapped into, async has a very difficult time getting a good hold on their own project. It gives the complex a sort of eldritch nature that I, for one, am a massive fan of. The Backrooms movie essentially creates a third understanding of what the Backrooms are or can be. The weird part is that this isn't shown to us through character exploration or action. This is shown primarily through the scene camera moving on its own, developing an understanding for the audience that the characters, to put it quite shortly, would not have an understanding of. There's a scene in the last third of the movie that is essentially a memory of a character's old childhood home before the camera moves down through the floor of the room it was in and pulls through the ceiling of what looks to be a bad copy of the first room. This process continues with the furniture getting more and more screwed up in placement and size until the room itself eventually becomes a yellow-lit square without even the little corner cutout for where the doorway once was. It goes further down into a place where a crack forms in the corner of the room and finally ends up with that square yellow-lit room and an archway cut into the corner at an uneven angle so that it looks even only to the camera to create a funny illusion effect. Through this archway is nothing but darkness. This, combined with dialogue from one of the two primary characters, essentially tells the audience that the Backrooms is a physical representation of dementia. Combined with other visual-only information throughout the movie, it is basically a place where forgotten locations, people, and objects from the real world are stored. In the process of that storage, though, the Backrooms makes copies of everything it intakes in an effort to re-remember that which was, for all intents and purposes, forgotten in the real world. The main character explaining pieces of this simply calls this a theory, and we never see him do anything that would explain how he gathered this understanding all on his own, but that's the gist. The Backrooms is a dementia-addled container for lost artifacts of reality, continuously copying and pasting further and further, misremembering with increasing gravity until it eventually wipes all discernible details of what it once was trying to preserve. This more or less flies in the face of the idea that async created the complex with the low proximity magnetic distortion system. What this establishes, especially with scenery from the movie, is that the Backrooms is a functional inorganic being. This turns the time jump into a sort of feature of the Backrooms, although sadly there is no time jump in this movie. There are other revisited features, like how people can see others through walls but not the other way around, but not the time stuff like Peter Tench's situation or that one incident at the end of Found Footage 3. There's also no point at which the doorways are access points between the real world and the Backrooms, or even spaces between points of the Backrooms themselves ever move, like they do in Found Footage 2 and 3. The doorway that is initially found by the main character in the movie always stays there, even though that's never known to be a guarantee as far as the YouTube videos are concerned outside of the async research facility. I mean, there's even a video in the playlist where a car falls through the asphalt and the remains of it are discovered in Found Footage 2, and that tape is dated to 1995, way after the events of the async plotline and, interestingly enough, the plot line of the movie. That doorway in the asphalt presumably only opens for that brief moment, as the Found Footage 2 tape itself only shows one car, not multiple driving into each other. The point I'm making is that the established characteristics of the Backrooms from Kane's videos are left out of Kane's movie. There's no reason for them to not be there, as they would provide fascinating conflict and character moments, but at the same time, their absence doesn't necessarily retcon or contradict anything from the videos exactly. There's still a way all of the concepts established could work in harmony, but the Backrooms being both a place that morphs space and time with its doors, and also being a place that remembers forgotten places and crudely distorts them through a dementia-style format is, well, it's a lot. It can work. There's a scene towards the end of the movie where the only surviving main character is trying to get through a door in the ceiling, and as she does so, the set piece around her is a sort of nexus point where, along the borders of a seemingly bottomless pit, there are floors upon floors upon floors of the Backrooms that just don't stop. So the idea that the copying goes on forever into a seemingly infinite depth can work. Again, it doesn't contradict anything, it's just a lot to believe, especially since, again, this isn't primarily discovered through character actions and decisions. This is shown to the audience without in-story support. With that, I suppose I should probably get to the characters and the plot, as I'm probably dragging the video by not mentioning them. There are two main characters in this movie. Clark is a failed architect turned failing furniture store owner that lives in said store because he was kicked out of his house by his wife. This occurs because not only does he come home far too late, not only does he come home drunk, but he is persistently nihilistic about life. He is a doomer in the most blunt sense of the word, and it is shown quite appropriately, I think, through his interactions with the second main character, his therapist, Mary. Mary is the sort of bog-standard therapist that does the bare minimum. You know those people who hate therapy for the very good reason that it is nothing more than emotional pandering, and the painfully long strides towards any sort of meaningful progress you could get if you just had a friend to talk to? She's that kind of therapist. She has her own issues, frankly, as she has suffered a great deal of childhood trauma at the hands of her psychotic and possibly schizophrenic mother. The movie begins with Mary witnessing the demolition of what once was her old house that all those scary memories took place in. And flashbacks are recurring throughout the film as they establish that Mary has a lot of her own issues and struggles with just letting go. The movie doesn't really do anything to resolve this, nor does it necessarily do anything with the fact that she hides her, what I can assume to be anxiety medication, but, it's there. The caretaker song as her mother is carted away in a psych ward is a nice touch. So what we've got is a therapist that, despite her best efforts, and possibly as a result of her own lack of resolution within herself, can't help this guy that flunks at life because he is a whiny loser. As much as I hate to say this, that's all we get. Async is nothing more than a member berry in this video, and honestly serves the plot far less than I was hoping for. There are two side characters, those being Clark's last two employees, but their relevance comes later to the plot. And since I said plot, let's talk about it. In fact, let's go over the movie scene by scene, since I've now established the baseline material of the movie. The opening is an async tape from a worker that got separated from his group somehow. This separation isn't shown, but he makes it back to his communication station, attempting to communicate to whoever sent him out there to no avail. A bird somehow winds up in the room with him, seems dead, then regains consciousness and flies away. This makes for a great scare, frankly. The worker then walks through a hallway to find out where the bird possibly came from, and is pursued by an entity we can't see. He gets cornered, gets killed by the creature off camera, and the tape ends. This is revealed to have been viewed by a team of scientists within Async itself, though we can't see any of the scientists' faces through the reflection of the monitor. Starting the movie with the analog horror style that kicked this whole thing off is quite honestly the best way to start the movie. Absolutely gold, 10 out of 10 introduction. It gets new people invested into the Backrooms movie in the same way the folks that watched the YouTube videos remember getting invested. The movie then moves to Mary watching over the destruction of her old home before shifting to her talking to Clark about how the mind creates loops that it thinks keeps itself safe from the traumas it experiences as a child. That's incredibly basic information and honestly not worded great, but yes, especially for children, trauma creates a need for the mind to rely on various coping mechanisms. This can take many forms, the vast majority of which lead to vice. This mind barrier theme is brought up later in a tape that Clark listens to, produced by Mary, as he drives and watches his ex-wife's house from a distance, which is creepy but not developed upon, so I guess it can be written off as pining for a better time. Regardless, the mind barrier theme doesn't go anywhere in this movie, to be honest. The conversation then moves to a reenactment of the night Clark was kicked out of his house, in which his particular wording reveals that he is significantly resentful towards his now ex-wife about being a student, him having to pay for that, and seemingly never getting the help he needs to afford what they both need to survive. He also seems to have an emotional attachment to the idea that he is an architect, and this goes absolutely nowhere in the movie also. This particular part is a little annoying because if there was something to further establish and support the idea that Clark is or was an architect, or at least went to architect school, his outlook on the Backrooms in particular would be very interesting to watch, especially if his dialogue is written in such a fashion to allude to that past. As you can probably tell from how I'm describing this, and as you surely know if you saw the movie for yourself, this goes literally nowhere beyond an abstract drawing that he makes during work hours at the cashier counter that is shown for 3 seconds. There's an illusion that Clark is just being wired poorly, and that more or less goes nowhere for the remainder of the film as well. We then get establishment for Clark's struggle to keep his furniture store afloat. Bills are not paid, nobody ever comes in, and on top of that he has to get someone to look at a power problem. Upon inspection of the breaker box, red circuit breakers appear in a place that is physically impossible for the breakers to be placed, and they seem to be wired to nothing. As power freaks out at night while Clark tries to sleep, he pulls those breakers and power goes out. This allows him to see into the back rooms and enter through a door outlined by a seam line in the wall. He phases through and sees a pile of furniture that is very awkwardly constructed before exploring the rooms themselves. He finds an inverted stop sign, aligning with what the YouTube fans know from videos as far back as Pitfalls. Clark then finds a caveman cardboard cutout with a speaker attached to it, repeating greetings in various languages. The purpose of this presently is unclear as to whether it's meant to attract or deter anything within the rooms themselves, but that can be explored later. There's an immovable hingeless door that the wires of the audio go through, as well as the wire to a camera attached to the wall of the room itself. Clark then finds a false wall that holds an async employee's clearance badge and various data artifacts like floppy disks and cassettes. Why this would be here, I honestly have no idea, as if we're meant to assume that async conducts explorations very carefully up to this point, it would be unbelievably irresponsible to leave data artifacts in the rooms that you're still studying and mapping with no idea as to what's inside. Anyway, Clark crawls through the tunnel that this false wall also reveals, finding himself in yet another room that has shoes and a chair stuck in the ground at weird angles, as if it's part of the floor construction. He then hears noise from the room he exited from, sees the cardboard cutout get destroyed, and makes a run for a tiny door that actually loops back to the inverted stop sign. Knowing this, Clark runs back to the doorway, takes a stool from the pile, and returns to the basement of his store. The tension throughout all of this is immaculately constructed and makes for a very entertaining exploration from Clark's perspective. However, someone was watching the camera that Clark saw in this expedition, and this scientist is revealed for dramatic effect. The date on the observation monitor is June 29th, 1990, which is after the events of the Peter Tench time skip. Keep this in mind. Anyways, Clark hurries back to his therapist at his earliest convenience and explains that he found a place under his store, and goes on to say, in spite of providing a map of the area, which is honestly well drawn, just saying, that the rooms are like trying to explain a dog to someone who's never seen one before, and asking them to draw it. This analogy makes no sense. I can't tell if Clark is trying to cover himself or something, in spite of going into this already aware that he will probably be perceived as crazy regardless of what he says. But why this analogy? Is it so difficult to say, I walked through a wall in the basement of my store that reveals yellow rooms that go on for longer than I'm able to explore with weird artifacts scattered about? That's not the most inconceivable thing in the world, and honestly very easily understandable. The hard parts are the tiny details, sure, but even then you can just say, objects are fused together, signs are backwards, and I think something lives in this place. I'm probably the only one that has contention with this, but the analogy is just silly. He then leaves in a huff after Mary is a bit slow to understand, and he says he'll be back with proof. I don't know why he even went if he knew from the outset he wasn't going to be believed, but hey, he's out. He then goes to the place where his 2 employees are staying and offers to pay them overtime for research. This begins the second analog scene of the movie, and this, like the beginning of the movie, is unilaterally peak throughout the entire scene. Because the tape is only stopped and started so often, the takes are long, and I am honestly refreshed to see actors go on for minutes and minutes at a time without some kind of cut needing to take place for them to get in position for a new take. There are some weird parts, though, just little things, like how Clark seems to have already grabbed a lot from the Backrooms, even 2 inverted stop signs, but he didn't grab the first one he ever saw, as it's shown again through the analog camera. I don't know where he would have gotten them, as it's not shown. It doesn't need to be, I just find it odd. There is a marker board where the map is drawn, so that's cool. Anyway, the gang travels on, eventually reaching a slide of some sorts where clothes and the destroyed caveman speaker is placed. As the guy going down with the camera is pulled back up and is trying to get the rope off of himself, he gets yanked back down by the remaining slack, and the bed it was attached to pulls the girl and Clark with him. The girl tries to chase whatever seems to have already killed and dragged away the boy, while Clark flees for his life. He then winds up in a pool room where the girl apparently can see him, but he can't see her through the wall. This is reflective of Found Footage 3, except this isn't a portal into the real world. This is inside the Backrooms itself. This is quite fascinating, as the ability to see or hear through walls, essentially bending space in an abstract fashion, can occur from within and from without. Very cool development of the mechanic. The camera is then picked up by whatever is chasing Clark, and the tape ends. This is, to say it again, an absolutely killer part of the movie, probably my favorite part of the entire thing. After a dream from Mary establishing her broken past I mentioned earlier, she receives a phone call from Clark stating that he opened the window and that he won't be coming back. On my first watch through, I thought this was in reference to a therapy scene I just hadn't been paying close enough attention to, but on the second watch through, knowing that that was something I wanted to look out for, I tried to keep focus for as much as I could, and I genuinely cannot remember a point where a window was mentioned in any analogy either from Mary herself or in the tape that Clark was listening to as he drove. So I don't really know what this is in reference to. It also bears mentioning, obviously, that Clark somehow escaped whatever presumed monster grabbed his camera and killed one of, if not both of his employees at that point, and got back into the real world, made a phone call to Mary saying something very cryptic, and then left to go back to the place where he just escaped with his life. Anyways, remember that scientist from earlier that saw Clark exploring the Backrooms? I didn't on my first watch through, so imagine my shock when I recognize his face, only when he recognizes Clark's face on a TV advertisement while at home with his family. Yes, he sees Clark's face and remembers that that's the guy. Now, this video isn't meant to be a deep dive. Frankly, this is already a bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I just have to ask this because I'm thinking about this just now. If he saw Clark, someone unknown, how was there not an exploration team sent to that place on the spot? I guess I can assume that whatever broke that caveman speaker was a threat scary enough to worry about, but through tools established later in the movie, that wouldn't be an issue if they actually worked, which we can somewhat conclude that they do. And also, remember, Clark found a bunch of async stuff. They'd at least want to confirm absolutely that he didn't take anything important from there. And at that point, why would they have not crawled into the room that he did, explored that little door, walk around even a little bit, and eventually find the doorway into the furniture store? We don't know how long the events from Clark's first exploration to this phone call to Mary is, but that surely would have been enough time. Even a day would have been enough for Async to reasonably find the doorway. And even if they delayed it, that would actually make it easier because Clark puts painter's tape around the doorway on both sides, so they would know where he's coming from. This scene is meant to set up a sort of two and two put together scene where by the end of the film this same scientist reveals that they actually know where the location Mary talks about is, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, I don't see how this comes off as a shock to the scientist in the exact way that it does. I understand the shock factor of seeing someone you had seen previously without having any context for while at your job, but this is made out to be as though this is the only other time the matter has been given any attention by Async at all. It's as if he went to tell Async, hey, someone's in the complex and I don't know who he is. He found so-and-so's bag and this creature seems to be chasing him. What should we do? And they just say, unless you can give us a name and a place, we can't help you there, bud. This would defeat the entire purpose of the surveillance camera that was put there. So why is that happening in this exact way? I don't understand this at all. Keep in mind, too, this is technically the third time Async has even shown up in this movie to any capacity, and it's not even at the facility. Async's role has taken a severe backseat in this movie, and I'm not very pleased about it. Anyway, Mary arrives at the furniture store to possibly confront Clark about whatever the heck that phone call was about. She then goes down into the basement, sees all the stuff he's gathered and the map he's drawn, and there's a flashback of her seeing the map he drew for her. This is completely unnecessary. We know that he did this. He literally did this less than half an hour ago. I'm sure the audience can remember. On a plus side, though, it's quite a nice touch that a further indicator of the doorway is an air current that's blowing the wind chimes around in the basement room. My wife pointed this out to me, and I agree. This is actually kind of nice. A fly goes into the doorway, convincing Mary to walk in as well. She then walks a great deal, with a certain shot pointing out that there is some kind of dead hand with flies circling around it behind a corner where the original inverted sign is, implying a rotting corpse. Quite ominous. She then makes her way into a dead end with what I can only describe as schizo drawings. The primary one, of course, is a pirate sitting on a large chair, seemingly catching a smaller golden person falling from a window. There's also writing about a floor plan being wrong, and how someone has signed plans that he didn't approve, yet the handwriting looks like his. There's no discernible meaning I can gather from this without a deeper analysis, and to be quite honest, that would be much easier to do once a Blu-ray or DVD release comes about. So if you want to see me do that kind of analysis, let me know and I'll buy one the minute it drops to get an extra long video of my thoughts about this movie. Mary gets startled by Clark, and upon asking where she is, he replies something to the effect of every place that ever was. Bro is definitely not acting like himself, because that was ridiculously cryptic and nondescriptive. As a noise draws closer and closer, Clark says it's only me, and that will actually become relevant in the next 10 or so minutes. Clark then knocks Mary out and takes her to a room where entities Clark was previously running from are now, for lack of a better word, tamed. He has tied Mary to the chair with what looks like the rope he used to send his former employee down the slide. Clark explains that these people are essentially misremembered copies that the rooms themselves create, but then does the "but IDK really, bro," and says it's just his theory for why everything looks and acts the way it does. Even if it wasn't a theory, how would we have found this out? There has been no scenes to establish that he's been able to tame these creatures, communicate with them, understand what they are, or why they exist. He just says this to inform the audience, but then says IDK bro, because even the writers know that in-universe this explanation makes no sense without establishment in the plot, so they just don't seem to bother. I mean, he's only been down here for, a week? And he's already learned all this, and survived this long, feasting off the flesh of these creatures, which he had to figure out somehow by resorting to cannibalism, only to be pleasantly surprised that it's not so morbid in this world. I would have loved some establishing scenes for this, but I guess that would have already been too much to ask for in a movie that's 100 minutes long. Clark then repeats something he's heard from Mary in therapy before about the mind's blocking, and essentially says that he wants to know that his issues with his wife aren't his fault. Through several grotesque scenes, like demonstrating that the distorted humans can't feel pain and can be eaten, despite never eating it himself, he essentially reenacts the night that he got kicked out of his house with much more raw and probably realistic for the time emotions with Mary. Mary doesn't let this fly, and essentially tells Clark that the reason he was kicked out wasn't because of the drinking or the late working, but the whining. To be honest, this is something I find quite believable. At the end of the day, the breaking point for a lot of people are the simple factors that make up their neurotic attitude. For Clark, even the drinking could be forgiven if he was truly trudging along and fighting the good fight for the sake of his family. Instead, like at the beginning of the movie, it is shown that he is not contrite for his own failings as a person. He is weak-minded and prone to complaining a great deal about his lot in life, always looking for someone or something to blame, because he just can't seem to ever be wrong. He's just an unfortunate lad that can't find his footing and needs help, but others are too ungrateful to help him. Mary makes a callback to the self-degrading remark that Clark made at the beginning of the movie about how this must just be how he's wired. This is partially sarcastic in nature, as she's saying this out of absolute desperation from being tied up, but also in extreme frustration that even if she will die, she expresses because she understands that in this position there's nothing more to lose, so she might as well be blunt. Clark is, in every respect, a loser, and he realizes this. In his following sorrow, he essentially makes the decision to stay in the Backrooms, perpetually a loser, claiming that this is finally a place where he feels like he's supposed to be, forgotten but not held accountable for his own failings. Mary accepts this so long as Clark lets her go, and he does. Only the moment he begins cutting the rope, the tamed creatures begin to freak out as something enters the room. This creature is essentially a malformed behemoth imitation of Clark as the pirate from his advertisements. It is the creature that kills the async researcher, judging by the shape of his pirate hat from the beginning of the movie and the pirate wheels sticking out of the wall at the time. And it's also the creature Clark alluded to when he said, "It's only me," earlier. Clark then speaks to this misremembered Clark, saying that they don't have to change, and it's just the way they're wired. In response, Misremembered Clark takes a good old chomp out of Clark's shoulder and seems to eat him off-screen as Mary escapes stained in his blood. Misremembered Clark then chases Mary through a series of rooms, eventually leading to a trapdoor in the ceiling with the bottomless pit I mentioned earlier. She makes her way through what is a startlingly accurate copy of the furniture store itself, before fighting Misremembered Clark, tripping over a wire and triggering cans of some kind of gas that begins to fill the room, setting off an alarm. She almost gets eaten by Misremembered Clark, using a piece of concrete that she saved from the demolition of her childhood home to hit Misremembered Clark in the head, and she escapes. Misremembered Clark bleeds on her face, which is weird considering that Clark had just established that the creatures down here can be eaten and don't feel pain. Misremembered Clark contradicts that in every way, so I don't know how that works. Anyways, Mary escapes through a narrow crack, only to be blasted in the face by a spray of that same gas, which seems to be knockout gas fired at her by an async explorer. He's stopped by another explorer, but she's already knocked out. She's then brought into the async research facility, where she is walked through various rooms to an interview room with one-way glass. The researcher that we've seen earlier shows up, and I'm gonna be honest, the presentation of this is a little pathetic. So far, according to the YouTube videos, Async has been shown as rather professional in their endeavors to address the complex with people. Even the report of the Peter Tench situation was conducted with a tone of voice that was obviously rattled, but with barely any stutters and a certain degree of professional confidence to keep hold of the room. In this, the scientist, who is apparently the actor for Creep... Right? Is that what it is?
Creep 1 and Creep 2.
In this, the scientist, who is acted by Mark Duplass, who I'm told is the antagonist for Creep, is constantly confused by Mary's questions and statements, even looking to the one-way glass seemingly for help, as if he even could see through the glass. The only things of note is that Mary simply repeats what Clark said about the dog analogy, and that Async used to make MRI machines. Oh, one other thing. When she describes where she was from and who she was with, the scientist shows her a picture of the furniture store from a file, as well as a picture of Clark with a poorly censored Misremembered Clark standing right in front of him. This means that Clark found Misremembered Clark, established a relationship with him despite his hostility, and also ran into him in a place where the camera also happened to be. I assume following the trail of wire back to wherever the camera is plugged into would have led to a dead end again, which is fine, but according to that last analog part of the movie, it was most likely Misremembered Clark that picked the camera up from the table when Clark was trying to help his female employee. So, somehow, Clark establishes a relationship with Misremembered Clark and gains understanding of the Backrooms and its entities that can only be communicated to the audience via an unsupported exposition dump and a camera sequence that is physically impossible to recreate and discover on one's own in-universe because the camera goes through several floors. After some cryptic scenery, the movie ends, yes, ends here, with a shot of a copied Misremembered Mary. What makes this shot so strange to me is that she's copied in the clothes she was wearing at the time she was apprehended by Async, which would possibly imply that this is actually a procedure that happens as punishment, but that's not possible because that obviously didn't happen to Clark. Clark was specifically misremembered by the Backrooms, if that is how the Backrooms are believed to function, as the furniture store advertisement. Whatever symbolism that entails is honestly beyond the scope of this video, but what I can say right now is that I can understand it working under certain contexts, but again, there would need to be establishment for this. Mary's copy is her as she was when Async found her. So did Async kill her, and this is how the Backrooms remembers her? There was a camera shot of her demolished house as well, so I guess the Backrooms remembers the wreckage as well. And the movie just ends here. Overall, the movie is wildly entertaining. There were parts that got my heart pumping both times I watched this in theaters, and I like the expanded mechanics of the rooms themselves. What I think this movie suffers from, though, is a lack of time. Had the movie been given even 20 minutes more, there could have been time to at least get an establishment of various mechanics started, and also more time with Async. A lot of the problems I have with this movie don't even require a full answer right away. The videos never did, and honestly there are still questions that are worth having because they keep the story interesting enough to hang on to. The problem with the movie is that there are too many questions to keep track of with too short of a runtime to explore them all adequately. The other place this movie fails in, and I do mean fails in, is the lack of async. The point of async in the YouTube videos is to provide a professional and scientific understanding of the Backrooms to whatever extent is possible in this fictional tale. Through the lens of async, the viewer begins to understand the mechanics of the complex itself, with the found footage segments serving as a layman's perspective that further inform the viewer as to what the rooms do when async isn't around. This could indeed be a sort of hybrid consciousness to the rooms, as the time skip of Peter Tench, the opening and closing of doorways seemingly at random, and the entities that lurk within the rooms discovered by both the found footage characters and the async explorers all establish a world that is very much playing by its own rules, irrespective of whatever the people within them want it to. The movie establishes that the Backrooms can be a place of hybrid consciousness, but doesn't do enough with it. In fact, I'd argue it doesn't do anything with it. The entities are, as far as the movie's information alone is concerned, inconsistently designed for the sake of spectacle. The rooms don't possess movements through space and time. Instead, what we get is an implied explanation through a camera movement and a character's best guess as to what's going on, when we have no reason to believe him because, as far as Mary or any of the audience is concerned, he's in a state of deep psychosis due to his prolonged, self-administered confinement in the Backrooms. This is something that a lot of folks are going to have fun with in terms of theory crafting, but the theories are pointless if they go nowhere. At least with the YouTube videos, there's an expectation that the series will continue, because every time a video is released, something new is learned and a question is answered. For example, my favorite video of the series is actually the most boring one, the lighting survey. Back when the portal is first torn open, a team extracts one of the light fixtures from the ceiling and takes it in for inspection. The funny part is that it's almost entirely standard materials, so it adds to the confusion as to how it was placed there, as if it was placed there by hand and where the power source is. In spite of those new questions, at the time of the upload, this confirms that parts of the Backrooms can indeed be taken out and examined outside of itself without too much consequence, as well as further expressing the reality that this place, whatever it is startlingly like our own world in terms of physics, because the lights adhere to the same rules and laws of physics and electricity that its real-world counterparts would. This adds to the mystique while not breaking any rules. There is none of that in this movie. You see artifacts Clark brings out, but you never see the conclusions of his discoveries or ideas because he drives himself into lunacy. Any layman's perspective that we could have gotten is essentially destroyed, and Mary is just uncooperative with async. This is really sad to me because the perspective of someone who's essentially a found footage character would have been awesome to compare and contrast with the async researchers in real time. So far, all the found footage characters wind up dead. The first one falls back into reality and falls to his death from the sky. The second one dies presumably due to the green electricity in the room she was in. The third one presumably dies of fatigue and exhaustion. It would have been awesome to at least have a setup for a sequel with Mary, prompted by the right kind of interrogation from someone who doesn't start the conversation with, "Hi, my name is Phil," tells async what she knows, and async even telling her a little of what they know. Not a ton, but just enough to get her to talk more, with an implied understanding from the film that she's never going to be let go because nobody can ever know about this project yet. They'll at least contain her like they did with Peter Tench, and this time she won't escape. That would have been an awesome setup to a future movie in which the sole purpose is to answer the questions from this first movie. My overall impression from the Backrooms 2026 movie was this: extremely entertaining, but ultimately leaving me asking for much more than I went in with. And that's saying something because I went in with moderate expectations considering the state of movies right now. On a purely personal note to end this review, I feel snubbed as a fan of the YouTube videos. I don't much care for horror as a genre, but I like the Backrooms a lot because it is an extremely captivating exploration of a commonly recurring subject in my nightmares. I wanted this movie to expand upon the YouTube videos, and it didn't. Perhaps that was the wrong expectation to have. If that was, I would have at least liked the movie to have given me that impression. Because so far, the movie can, technically, still work within the pre-established world that Kane created. But it would take a lot of work on the scriptwriters to rectify problems and inconsistencies that appear to only be there for the sake of provoking a thematic analysis that ultimately doesn't mean anything if the plot can't support it. The childhood trauma underpinning is nice, but it doesn't go anywhere meaningful. Async is absent, so a formalized understanding of the place is shunted in place of a crazy man's understanding that we can't take for absolutely granted because he is very, very, very obviously not in the best state of mind to start explaining what the complex is. Ultimately, what this feels like is what a modern TV show feels like now. A Season 1 that exists solely to set up Season 2. Only, at least in TV, it's revealed that there will be a pending threat for the next season or something like that. In this movie, it's not even clear what to be anticipatory for next. A well-written second movie, this time almost purely from the perspective of Async, would be wonderful. Such a sequel doesn't even have to answer all the questions I've put up in this video. It just needs to do what the YouTube videos always do. Give its best shot at making sense of it all in-universe through the lens of the character work and their observations of the world building. I'm disappointed that this movie didn't do that from the outset, but assuming another movie could ever be in the works from Kane in the future, it should be handled with much more care. This movie was very obviously constructed to get new people introduced to the concept of the Backrooms, but it leans too hard into that construction and ultimately betrays, leaves hanging, or places into question the events previous fans had an understanding of. As far as my expectations for a YouTuber movie, this was great. I honestly didn't expect something with such a budget to be this entertaining. And that's one thing I will praise this movie for to the very end. The plot may be weak, the themes may be non-existent, but the action is amazing. Every scare, every chase, every opportunity to add to the horror tone is capitalized upon to an excellent measure. The music is fantastic, and the sound design is great. The acting is stellar, and the Backrooms really do look like what they would intuitively look like without the analog tape filter of the YouTube videos. This movie is undeniably entertaining, to such an extent that I would not complain at all for owning a physical copy of it in my home. But as far as the overall experience, especially when compared to its peers within the YouTuber movie space, my choice will still always go to Iron Lung. With that movie, there was a very, very, very loose template of in-game lore to expand upon in whatever fashion was deemed acceptable, with great acting, set pieces, music, atmosphere, and honestly a pretty decent plot. With the Backrooms movie, a lot of the issues I have would honestly be explained away by just knowing for sure that this doesn't even tie back to the YouTube videos, and that it's a standalone universe. Nothing in the movie makes that clear, though, and only another movie that actively contradicts other events from the YouTube videos while remaining consistent with itself and itself alone would prove that. And I'd be totally fine with that, but it has to be clear. And like a lot in this movie, it just isn't clear. Theory crafters will have fun, but unless ultimately resolved and not continuously baited and key-jangled for years and years and years for the sake of money, as has been the case in the past with other once-beloved franchises, those theories are pointless to make. So yeah, overall, very entertaining, but ultimately, to use a phrase from my dad, halfway decent. As far as horror movies go, Iron Lungs got this one beat without question, and there's really nothing else to say. Laters. This particular part is a little annoying because if there was something to further establish and support the idea that Clark is or was an architect, or at least went to architect school, his outlook on the Backrooms in particular would be very Don't do that.
I was trying to be quiet for you.
You don't do that. You can't come into my peripheral. I'm talking about the Backrooms. You're going to scare me.
You should keep that in as an...
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was trying to be quiet.
Come out of the corner of my eye as I'm trying to narrate about a horror movie. I'm already on edge just remembering it, dude.
Dino Nuggets.
The Dino Nuggets, man!
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I didn't know I was that quiet.